Anyone here, out of curiosity, anyone here ever gone to the Renaissance Fair? Regardless of where, a Renaissance Fair. Fair with an E. I read a marvelous comic novel a few years ago. It was really an interesting fantasy conjecture where William Shakespeare ends up in a spiritual connection with a modern kid who's a graduate student in Santa Cruz and ends up showing up at a Renaissance fair, and he sees all these people in costume and the sign that says Renaissance Fair, and Shakespeare wonders to himself, what the hell is the Renaissance? Now, you know, the Renaissance Fair is sponsored by an organization called SCA, the Society for a Creative Anachronism. I gotta love it. You gotta love it. Here's the thing. We Jews love anachronisms. Go ahead, ask me how. Ask me how much. I'm glad you asked. The rabbis of the Talmud are deeply distressed that when we read Genesis, we have this fabulous episode where God drops by to tell Abraham, Mazel Tov on the circumcision, you're going to have a baby a year from now, and by the way, I'm in the neighborhood to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, God is accompanied by two angels, and Abraham, only seeing 3 hungry guests, immediately sets out Sarah to kneading dough with the hands of a surgeon to make cakes for them, and runs to the herd and selects a prime calf to roast, and then serves the guests the roast veal with freshly made bread and freshly churned butter. The rabbis in the Talmud are very upset that Abraham is serving meat and milk together. The ruling that we don't mix meat and milk hadn't been invented in Abraham's time. It wouldn't be till the rabbis invented it out of whole cloth. But no problem, they solved their own problem. God serves the bread that Abraham brings him, and like a good restaurant, they bring you bread and butter to patchki with and fill up on while they're cooking your meal. It takes 42 minutes to make pita from the time the flour hits the water, but it takes a few hours at 20 minutes to a pound to cook a whole roast veal. So there was at least 2 hours between the bread and butter and the beef. Problem solved. The rabbis in the Talmud are very distressed that the blind, aged Isaac says to his older twin son, Esav, go get me a nice venison, some game like I like, and I'll bless you. Well, the rabbis say, is this gruber yid, this jock, this nerd, this useless fellow, this thug, Esav, is going to bring a treif deer to our saintly tzaddik Isaac? He said, no problem. The arrowheads were honed razor sharp, and Esav was just a dead shot that with a single shot he could simultaneously sever the carotid artery, the jugular vein, and the windpipe for kosher slaughtering. Our sages are not above making fun of themselves, because the practice in Babylon, nobody went out bareheaded, so this becomes the Jewish norm. To this day, the swamp Arabs in the south of Iraq, the little kids run around stark naked, but never bareheaded. So the rabbis ask, how do we know that our patriarch Jacob wore a head covering? And it says, well, right there in Genesis it says, Vayetze Yaakov, Jacob went out. And would a good pious Jew like Jacob go out bareheaded? Too arcane. All right. Circular logic, friends. I try this. Do you think Jacob would leave without putting on his seatbelt? That's how anachronistic we are. We're not above a little cultural appropriation. We adopted the Central European carnival season treat of poppy pocket pastry, which they call in Yiddish Montaschen. And we call it Hamantaschen after Haman, saying because Haman wore a 3-cornered hat, which was very big fashion vogue. It's so 1730. How far back does that one go? Not to the time of Haman. Hanukkah folklore. Why do we play with dreidels, trendles, teetotums? Because, the folklore says, when, according to the book of Maccabees, Antiochus, the Seleucid emperor, forbade the study of Torah on pain of death, Jews who wanted to study Torah would sneak into the forest hiding out. And if patrols of soldiers found them, they'd put away the Torah and bring out the tops and the coins and start playing. Well, they weren't supposed to be gambling either, but since soldiers all gamble, they let them get away with it. But the dreidel wasn't invented till the 16th century. Hanukkah folklore. In our Sunday school books, the Maccabees are shown carrying nice round Greek spears with a 6-pointed star on it, the Magen David. But the six-pointed star wasn't recognized or used in any way as a Jewish symbol much before the end of the 18th century, and it didn't become official till the First Zionist Congress in 1897. So the Maccabees didn't have it on their shield, but we love to give it to the kids in the pictures anyway. And the best-known anachronism: why do we eat latkes? Say it with me, everybody. Because they're fried in, which invokes that little flask of oil that, according to the Talmudic legend, which is a real late add-on, miraculously burned for 7 days when it was only enough to burn for one. But the real part is not the frying, but the potatoes. How far back in Jewish tradition did we have potatoes? They showed up with Columbus in 1492. And not much of anybody in Europe ate them before the 1790s. Originally, the Hanukkah treat were cheese pancakes. Pancakes, yes, but cheese pancakes. Blintzes, anyone? Why cheese? Well, at least cheese pancakes or cheese treats have deeper roots than potatoes. Cato the Elder wrote in his cookbook a recipe for what he calls in Latin globi, plural of globes. Nice round fried dough balls stuffed with, say it with me everybody, cheese. I just laid the cheese right in your lap, Heather. Fried dough balls stuffed with cheese. So at least, here's the interesting thing. Cato the Elder published his cookbook right around the year 165 BC. Anyone remember what else happened in 165 BCE? The Maccabean Rebellion. One could therefore argue that, yeah, but why cheese? And here's the interesting part. See, all of that was just a warm-up. If you were interested by it, that was totally accidental. Cheese for Hanukkah is justified by the ultimate Hanukkah anachronism. We know the Maccabees. We know the associated legend in the book of the Maccabees about Hannah and her 7 sons. From the eldest to the youngest, Antiochus put each of them horribly to death in the front of the others, one at a time, after inviting them to yield to him, and they all refused, right down to the youngest. The Maccabees and their battle, the consecration of the temple, the battle and the war, and the suffering of Hannah and her sons. But there's another Hanukkah story that has nothing to do with Hanukkah, but is associated with it. Judith and Holofernes. This is one of those books that's a Jewish book that the Jews don't have anymore. It's in the Catholic Bible. The story is told that the Assyrians come to lay siege to the city of Betulia, euphemism for Jerusalem. Betulia, God's maiden fair. They can't break through the walls, but the defenders are starving. So the beautiful young widow, Judith, whose name after all Yehudit means the Jewish girl, sneaks out of the city into the camp. She puts aside her widow's weeds. She dresses in her most beautiful, provocative clothes and perfumes herself, puts on makeup, and goes under a flag of truce and presents herself to Holofernes. And for over a week, he's treating her as an honored guest, hoping to get a little closer. And she keeps intimating that, well, perhaps later, but every evening she asks permission to leave past the pickets, the guard perimeter, so she can daven Ma'ariv outside of this Goyish pagan camp full of idols. So the guards are used to seeing her leave every evening at nightfall and come back a little while later when she's through davening. Finally, after a week, she intimates to Holofernes, tonight's the night. And she hostesses him, she wines him, she dines him, she wines him some more wine, a little more dinner, lots more wine, and eventually, in a drunken stupor, he falls asleep. She cuts off his head, sticks it in her purse, and leaves the camp to go daven Ma'ariv. Except this time she doesn't come back. And in the morning, when the sun rises, the Assyrian army is dismayed to see their general's head mounted on the gates of Betulia, and they leave in a panic, and the city is saved. Through the courage of this noble, brave young Jewish woman putting herself on the line. Now here's the thing. The story has nothing to do with Hanukkah. Hanukkah goes to the same time, 165, that Cato is giving us a recipe for cheese donuts. So the time frame for Judith is off, but here's what's intriguing about it. Why did he end up drinking so much wine? Because he was getting more and more excited by the scent of her perfume. Anyone know what Dracula's favorite Guerlain fragrance is? Le Bleu. He got more and more excited, so he's drinking more and more wine, except tradition is, no, she was feeding him, and since she had a meatless kosher diet in the Assyrian camp, it was heavy on the cheese, and the cheese made him thirsty so that he drank more than usual, which allowed her to reduce him to a drunken stupor. And therefore we eat cheese pancakes at Hanukkah, and we only swapped around to pancakes in the 18th century when potatoes came around. What does it have to do as an anachronism with Hanukkah? The fact that the story was probably written about the time of the Maccabees is incidental. It's set 600 years earlier. But here's the thing, friends. The widow's risk that she runs, going out under flag of truce, making herself vulnerable and seemingly accessible to this idolatrous invading enemy, the risk she ran for her people, inspired Jews throughout the ages struggling to preserve Judaism. And the widow's pious observance, eating meatless and going out to daven every night, encouraged Jews forbidden to worship on pain of death. It was a mode of spiritual resistance, this book, this little story, and attaching it to Hanukkah, as much of a spiritual resistance as the Hanukkah at Dachau in 1944, when the newly rounded up Jews that had been hands off in Hungary until it was clear that the Allies were winning the war, so the Nazis, instead of escalating their defense of their conquered territory, accelerated the transportation and deportation of Jews to the death camps. Hanukkah at Dachau, 1944. Freezing cold, people being scientifically starved to death, and yet they saved a little bit of their so precious fat ration, the margarine they were given, pulled a few threads out of their already threadbare clothes they were freezing in, stole some scraps of metal to bend into lamps into which they put the wicks smeared with the fat, and meeting secretly in one of the bunks, they held a Hanukkah party for the children. And one of the men who'd have to go out the next day in wooden shoes in the frozen mud had carved a piece out of his wooden shoe to whittle some dreidels for the kids to play with. The risks we run for our people have inspired Jews throughout the ages. Okay. Yeah, but what about the historicity of it? Nowadays, everyone likes to say, yeah, but, and what about? What about, can it be real if the time frame is off? If it's clearly pseudepigraphic, that's a $20 Bible study word for fake news. Can it be real if the time frame is off? And the answer is, oh, yes, indeed. It's as real as it comes. We presuppose that Abraham separated milk and meat. We presuppose that Jacob wore a yarmulke. We presuppose that the Maccabees carried Magen David shields. Because we do not regard our long ago forebears as an abstraction. They are immediately real to us. So it's important that they are almost immediately recognizable, not artifacts of the long ago past, but a distant mirror in which to see a reflection of our own selves. The heroes and martyrs alike are our kinfolk, in whom we see ourselves. So seeing them in our own terms instead of their own makes perfect sense. It heightens the spirit of connectedness between us. It blurs the constraints of time to make our second Hanukkah blessing, Bayamim Hahem Bazman Hazeh, all the more accessible a concept. And it emphasizes the integrity and the continuity of the Jewish experience, giving credibility and substance and dignity to who we are. while seeing the world through Jewish eyes, our Jewish eyes, thus presupposes the unity and commonality of the shared national history of our fabulously ancient people. At the same time, it involves a kaleidoscopic variety of authentic Jewish cultural traditions from Jewish communities all over the world. As such, we celebrate the multifaceted diversity of a global Jewish experience that sees fried in oil Hanukkah treats running the gamut, from Polish potato latkes to Mexican churros, huge Jewish community in Mexico City, to Indian jalebi and Moroccan jalabia, which is the same thing from the opposite end of the world, to Iraqi zingula, which all the culinary experts say is Iraqi for Hanukkah, but my Iraqi school director insisted they always had it at Purim. And to the compelling question, yeah, but latkes, churros, jalebi, zingula, which of them is authentically Jewish? The answer is yes. In the many ways we celebrate, and for the many causes we have to rejoice, even in these dark and difficult times. On this feast of rededication, remember to bring to the endeavor the passion of the Maccabees and the dedication and resourcefulness of Judith. And if you happen to have Judith showing up as a Hanukkah guest, remind her that you made a point to serve cheese blintzes in her honor, and that notwithstanding the gift-giving tradition of Hanukkah, seeing how she goes through wine, your Hanukkah party that she's welcome to is strictly BYOB. Shabbat Shalom.